Aunt Agatha's Surprise by Anne Didier. Chapter 1. A Surprise. Just as we got to Sackton, my little sister Laura said, "Oh, I forgot. Aunt Agatha told me on the phone that she has a big surprise for us." Dad pulled the steering wheel sharply as he turned left and muttered,
"What on earth has Agatha invented this time? A scooter that goes backwards, dishes that dirty themselves?"
"Come on, Pete," said Mum. "The girls are looking forward to a holiday with their aunt." Dad was always a little hard on his sister. Maybe it was because he had been scared and upset by the experiment she carried out on him when they were little. In any case, Aunt Agatha was now an amazing inventor, and she had won important awards for her discoveries. Mum turned round to look at us. "What do you think the surprise is, Amy and Laura?" Laura suggested, "Maybe she has finished her anti-barking biscuits for dogs." "Or maybe it's her soft-screen telly," I said, as the car stopped outside number 7 Crane Street. But we had guessed wrong. Aunt Agatha really did have a big surprise for us. Aunt Agatha was having tea at the bottom of the garden with a man. He had a pointy goatee beard and a huge moustache, and he was wearing a strange black coat that was long at the back. "Hello," called Aunt Agatha. "Come and meet Gustav." When we got closer, she said, "This is Gustav Goatherd, my fiancé." "Your what?" asked Laura. She nearly choked on the words. Mum could not hide her surprise either. "Excuse me?" she asked. The man stood up quickly and kissed Mum's hand. Then he pulled out a chair for her.
"Please have a seat, madam. You seem a little overcome by the news."
Mum coughed several times and stood in front of the man, looking totally confused. Fortunately, Edgar, Aunt Agatha's robot butler, arrived with a plate of biscuits. He made everyone laugh by kissing Mum's hand and spilling the biscuits all over her. Aunt Agatha chuckled. "I have improved Edgar's programme. Gustav thought he was not very polite to women." Chapter 2. Mystery in the Air. We sat round the table in the garden. I think we were all a bit confused by Aunt Agatha's fiancé. Mum started the conversation. "So, Gustav, that's not a very common name."
"Well,"
said Dad.
"apart from the famous Gustav Eiffel, who built the Eiffel Tower..."
Aunt Agatha's fiancé looked alarmed and said,
"You mean the person responsible for that hideous tower that has ruined Paris?"
Dad and Mum looked at each other in amazement. I spotted Aunt Agatha giving Gustav a nudge with her elbow. "Gustav's not really into modern architecture," she explained.
"Modern? Modern? The Eiffel Tower was built in the 19th century,"
said Dad. Gustav smiled and said,
What is the word you use, Agatha? Old-fashioned? Yes, that's it. I'm a bit old-fashioned, you see."
After tea, we walked Mum and Dad back to the car. "Don't worry about these two darlings," said Aunt Agatha. "They will have a great holiday."
"I'll try not to take up too much of their aunt's time,"
said Gustav. My parents' car soon disappeared down the street.
"What an unusual carriage with no horses,"
we heard Gustav say to himself. That evening, Aunt Agatha came to put us to bed and turn off the lights. "Good night, my darlings," she called. Then she went downstairs. Laura whispered, "Gustav seems nice, but it's like he's from another planet, isn't it?" "I know," I said in a quiet voice. Gustav had behaved in a very strange way all evening. For example, when Laura showed Aunt Agatha the photos of her school trip, he pulled a monocle out of his pocket and looked at them in amazement. He went on and on about the photos and the fact that they were in colour, but really they were nothing special. Half of them were out of focus, and they were all a bit pink because some water had got into Laura's disposable camera. My sister went on, "And did you notice that Aunt Agatha kept on nudging him, as if she was trying to hide something from us?" "So you noticed that too," I said. Laura looked at me and her eyes sparkled. "I smell a mystery," she said. "Shall we go and spy on those two?" We tiptoed downstairs and stood in the hallway. We could hear everything Aunt Agatha and Gustav were saying. "Can you help me to take apart the machine in the attic tomorrow?" asked Aunt Agatha. "The little darlings are very sweet, but they are also very nosy. I don't want them using that machine."
"I understand, my dear Agatha,"
said Gustav.
"It would give me the greatest pleasure to be of assistance to you."
Laura tapped me on the shoulder. "Did you hear that, Amy? There's a machine in the attic." "Yeah, a machine that we are not supposed to touch." Then Aunt Agatha said in an excited voice, "Tomorrow is the 15th of April. I must not forget to open that mysterious envelope we found in the hall dresser." Now we knew Aunt Agatha was definitely hiding things from us. Laura pulled my sleeve. "Come on, Amy, let's go up into the attic. I want to see the machine that Aunt Agatha does not want her nosy darlings to find." "Okay," I whispered. We got to the top floor and pushed open the attic door. The room was full of weird things: old machines for buttering toast, a haircut and shampoo robot, and some remote-controlled garden tools that Aunt Agatha had never managed to sell. I said, "There are no new machines here. Everything looks the same." "Everything except that," said Laura, pointing her torch at a shower cubicle full of electric wires. Laura looked inside the cubicle. "Come and see, Amy. It's full of buttons." I followed her inside the cubicle. It looked like the cockpit of a spaceship. My sister began pushing buttons and tapping a screen. "Look at these numbers flashing." But Laura didn't have time to finish her sentence. Something incredible happened. We were sucked down a plug hole. Chapter 3. Same house but different. It's hard to explain what happened next. I felt like I was leaving my body behind and becoming lighter, and that I was being thrown around in every direction. Then I landed with a bump next to Laura. She said, "I wonder what this machine is for, apart from making you feel sick." "Well, it's certainly not a shower cubicle." Laura and I were sitting in a bathtub. It had clocks attached to it, with gears and levers that were totally different to the buttons in the shower cubicle. Laura said, "Look, the attic has changed too." The room was less cluttered, as if some ultra-quick removal people had emptied it in the last few seconds. Laura gave me a worried look. "What happened?" she asked. "I don't know," I replied. "Let's go down and ask Aunt Agatha." We hurried out of the attic and stopped on the landing. Although it was quite dark, we could see that Aunt Agatha's house had completely changed. In place of the fitted carpet on the landing, there were floorboards, and the wallpaper was not the same. We went down to the ground floor. The only piece of furniture we recognised in the hall was the dresser, but even that looked different. It was a lighter colour and looked much newer. We walked towards the kitchen, but there was no kitchen. Instead, there was a little sitting room with an oil lamp on a low table and a pile of carefully folded newspapers. I looked for the light switch, but I could not find one. Suddenly, I had a strange thought. I said to my sister, "Laura, can you read the date on those newspapers?" Laura picked up a newspaper and peered at it. "This one is from 1912, she said. Laura grabbed another newspaper from the pile and gave me a worried look. "This one is too," she cried. "Amy, we are in a different century." "Aunt Agatha has made a machine that goes back in time," I said. Laura clung on to me and hugged me tight. Just at that moment, we heard some muffled sounds at the front door. Then a key turned in the lock. Chapter 4. What nonsense! A man and a woman came into the hall with a police officer. "Just as I told you," said the woman. "There are people in the house, but our neighbour is away on holiday." The policeman held up an oil lamp. He looked at our pyjamas and frowned.
"Two young thieves, girls disguised as boys,"
he said. "We are not thieves," I said. But the policeman pushed us firmly towards the door.
"You can explain who you are and what you're doing here when we get you to the police station."
He led us to the front door. A carriage pulled by horses was waiting outside. As the carriage moved off, Laura asked me in an anxious voice, "Will we be okay, Amy?" "I hope so," I whispered back. Soon the carriage stopped and the policeman led us into the police station. He told another police officer what had happened.
"These two young girls were in Mr. Gustav Goatherd's house in Crane Street. Fortunately, a neighbour raised the alarm."
I nudged Laura and whispered in her ear, "Gustav Goatherd, that's Aunt Agatha's fiancé." Suddenly, it was all clear to me. Gustav lived in the same house as Aunt Agatha, but in a different century. They met because of the time travel machine. The policeman sat down behind a desk. He took a pen and began questioning us.
"Your details, miss? Name, surname, date of birth?"
"Amy Checkett, born the 25th of March, 2003. The policeman nearly choked.
"Don't be so impertinent, young lady. You are talking to an officer of the law. Let's try again. Date of birth."
"My big sister really was born in 2003, said Laura. Then she began to explain everything to the policeman, all about Aunt Agatha, Gustav, the time machine, the 1912 newspapers. The policeman was furious.
"This is nonsense!"
he shouted.
"I see that you young ladies prefer lying to telling the truth. As you refuse to cooperate, I will write the report myself and then lock you up."
"Lock us up?" groaned Laura. The policeman read out loud as he scribbled in a notebook.
"At 4 o'clock in the morning on Monday the 15th of April 1912, two thieves broke into Mr. Gustav Goatherd's house."
Laura pulled my sleeve and whispered, "The 15th of April 1912. That date rings a bell." "The Titanic!" I cried. My sister and I had seen the film at least 4 times, and we pretty much knew the story off by heart.
"What about the Titanic?"
asked the police officer. "The Titanic sank this morning," I replied. "It's a well-known historical fact." The policeman raised his eyes to the ceiling.
"Ha, ha, ha! More lies to get out of going to prison. The Titanic is unsinkable."
"That's what everyone thought," said Laura. I interrupted her. "Officer, do you get the newspaper delivered?" He turned to look at the clock.
"Yes, it will be here later this morning, but you will already be locked up."
The policeman finished writing his report and picked up a large bundle of keys. Then he pushed us towards the back of the police station where the prison cells were.
"If the Titanic has sunk, I promise I will release you immediately,"
he said, opening the door to a cell. Next thing we knew, we were locked in a dirty little room. Laura began to cry. I tried to comfort her, but to tell the truth, I was not feeling much better myself. Chapter 5. The Letter. Some time later, the policeman came into our cell waving a newspaper. He looked very upset.
"The Titanic sank early this morning. The unthinkable has happened,"
he said in a strange voice.
"What century did you say you came from?"
"We left our aunt's house on the 14th of April 2014 at 10 o'clock at night," I replied.
"The 14th of April 2014.
He repeated, looking dazed.
Right. Well, I promised, so you are free to go. I will take you back to Crane Street.
It was late morning by the time we set off in the carriage with the policeman. The town looked completely different to what we were used to. There were no car parks or traffic lights, and some buildings were missing. There were just a few horse-drawn carts and carriages clattering along the cobbled streets. There was a wash-house where the cinema should have been. Women were rinsing sheets by hand. Others were slapping clothes on wooden boards. When we arrived in Crane Street, Laura said, "Unbelievable! There's a field of potatoes where the supermarket should be."
Supermarket?
Said the policeman. He didn't know the word. He dropped us in front of Gustav's house and opened the front door for us.
You should go back to your sentry as fast as possible. Good luck.
On his way back to the carriage, he added,
I, for one, do not wish to know any more about this matter.
Laura and I hurried upstairs to the attic. We tried to make the machine work by pulling levers and turning dials, but nothing happened. We tried for a quarter of an hour, and then we realised that we were going to have a problem getting back. Laura started shouting, "I can't bear it! I don't want to stay in a world where I don't know anybody and there are no televisions or computers." I took my little sister's arm and said, "Be brave, Laura. There must be a way of getting through to Aunt Agatha." But I was not sure I believed it. Suddenly my sister calmed down. She said, "I know, Amy. Just before we used the time machine, Aunt Agatha mentioned an envelope that she had to open on the 15th of April. That's today." "That's right," I said in excitement. "An envelope in the drawer in the hall dresser. What if it was from us? What if it was from us?" Now I understood. We found some paper in a little writing desk. I wrote an urgent message. "Dear Aunt Agatha, please come and find us in the past. It's midday on the 15th of April, 1912. From your darlings." Laura wrote on the envelope, "To be opened on the 15th of April, 2014. Then we went down to the ground floor and slipped our letter into the drawer in the hall dresser. Chapter 6. Aunt Agatha Pulls the Lever. We had just closed the dresser drawer when we heard someone hurrying down the attic stairs. Aunt Agatha appeared on the landing. Laura and I ran over to her. "Aunt Agatha!" "My darlings!" cried my aunt, holding out her arms. "Just imagine! I thought you were asleep. I'm glad you got that message to me." Aunt Agatha took our letter out of her pocket. The amazing thing was that it was all yellow and had damp patches on it. It had aged by a century in a few seconds. We went up to the attic together. Laura and I climbed into the bath. Aunt Agatha turned various dials and pulled several levers to start the gears that made the machine work. Then she climbed in with us. Suddenly, we felt like we were being sucked down. We were very happy when we stepped out of the time travel machine and back into Aunt Agatha's attic in 2014. Gustav was waiting for us. "We must take this machine to bits," said our aunt. "Time travel can be dangerous. I don't think we should use it any more." Laura asked, "But what if Gustav wants to go back?" Gustav said,
"I can't imagine going back now. I don't know if it is all the modern technology or your charming aunt, but I find this century so very delightful."
Aunt Agatha gave a little chuckle as she happily pulled the wires out of the machine. Gustav smiled and said to me and my sister,
"As for you, my little darlings, since that appears to be your nickname, I am overjoyed that you are with us once again. The thought that you might have been prisoners in the past makes me shudder."
Laura winked at me. Just having Gustav there and listening to the old-fashioned way he talked was like travelling back in time, but without any of the risks, of course. The end.